Question. Dear Kim, first I want to thank you for all your wonderful videos. I watch them almost every day and I'm very grateful for all the wisdom you share. Recently you posted a video on sensitivity to sound, misophonia. I have no sensitivity to sound, but to electromagnetic fields. I've had it my whole life, even before the first wireless technology came into play. But wireless technology is even worse. I meet a lot of spiritual people who state that if my vibration is high enough and I am enlightened enough, my sensitivity would be gone. I know that were some awakened people who can even drink poisons without it affecting them. But although I'm on the spiritual path since I was 21, I'm 55 now, I'm still not able to drink poisons and still got headaches and heart palpitations from a certain level of exposure to EMFs. I have no anxiety disorder and live a normal, fruitful life. I've always been very sensitive to vibrations and can read them. That is why, for example, I never drank alcohol and became a musician. I suppose that there is truth in saying that when I have overcome all my separate selves and are in a state of enlightenment to lower vibrations, no lower vibrations can affect me. But I'm also convinced that EMFs cause a synthetic ethereal grid that is not healthy and makes it harder to tune in to the natural ethereal world. That it dumbs down people and makes it easier for negative forces to get on board. I think Rudolf Steiner would say that wireless radiation is very Ahrimanic. But last but not least, I have Rh negative blood, which is said is copper-based and electric in nature and not magnetic. Maybe this can also be a factor of my sensitivity to EMFs. Please can you share your take on this? Well, so this is actually touching upon some interesting topics. So let's start with the sensitivity. People have, and I've said this before, many spiritual people. Why are we spiritual? We are more sensitive. And we are more sensitive than the average person. And that's why we're open to the spiritual side of life, because we can sense energy, and therefore we sense there's a spiritual energy beyond the material. I mean, that's why we're interested in the spiritual side of life. But so the way I see it, though, is that there is sensitivity and there is a reaction to the sensitivity. And I've seen this in myself over the years. I've seen it in many, many spiritual people. So you have the raw sensitivity that makes you sensitive to certain energies. But on top of that, you can build this emotional, mental construct, what I call a subconscious self, that reacts to the sensitivity. So that in your mind, you have a resistance to it. And that resistance I've seen in many, many spiritual people, and I can see it in myself when I look back, makes it worse, makes everything worse. Because now on top of your sensitivity, you have this reaction to it. And that reaction will, it can build a negative spiral. And so what I'm trying to say is, you have for many, many years, you have this awareness that there are certain diseases, I'm talking about physical diseases, that are psychosomatic, meaning you have physical symptoms, but you have a psychological reaction that is actually either creating physical symptoms or making them worse. So what I've seen over the years is that spiritual people, when you create this reaction to your sensitivity, whatever you're sensitive to, it's the reaction that bothers you. It's not really the sensitivity. It's the psychological reaction that makes it worse, that makes it a negative experience. So I'm not denying that you are sensitive to electromagnetic fields, or people are sensitive to sound, or sights, or smells, touch, whatever it may be. Many people are sensitive to many different things. And I'm not denying that you are sensitive. I'm not trying to say that, oh, electromagnetic fields don't affect you and blah, blah, blah. I'm not denying that there's a reality to it. I'm not even denying that there could be a physical reality with your blood type. That's not what I'm talking about. But what I'm talking about is my approach to life, to spirituality, has always been, there are certain things I can't change, and the things I can't change, what I need to do is change my reaction to them, so that I don't make it worse with my reaction. So I would recommend for anybody who has this kind of sensitivity to look at your reaction to it, look at how you look at it. I mean, the person is saying, I'm functioning, I have a relatively normal life, but still look at, is there some kind of psychological reaction to it? I remember in the Summit Lighthouse, the Summit Lighthouse had a lot of outer rules, don't do this, don't do that. And it was based on this, energy, and everything affects us. Maybe I sound like I'm making fun of it, but I'm not really trying to make fun of it, because there's a reality to it in the sense that everything is vibration and everything has a certain vibrational effect on our energy fields. So, but what I'm trying to say is that what I saw over the years was that on top of the raw sensitivity to energy, you can build this mental emotional construct. And for example, it had teaching about rock music. Rock music was bad for you. And many people built this reaction to it, that, let's say you are in a public place and somebody's playing rock music. Some people would go into feeling, oh, this was so bad, they had been exposed to this, it shouldn't have happened, and maybe now they opened their auras to dark forces, so now they need to find a place and give some decrees as quickly as possible. Right? And again, I'm not trying to make fun of it. There's a lower level of the path where you are more susceptible to being influenced by the dark forces. So it may very well be that, for example, electromagnetic fields can open your aura up to dark forces. I'm not saying that can't happen. But I do believe that as you raise your vibration, as you overcome the things in your psychology that make you vulnerable to these dark forces, they won't have as much of an inroad into your consciousness. But if you still have this self that reacts to it, then they still have an inroad. You see what I'm saying? I'm not saying that if you took a person, put them in a locked room and exposed them to very loud rock music for 24 hours, that it wouldn't affect their energy field. Obviously it would. But what I'm saying is that if you are exposed to it for 5 minutes, it's not going to kill you, right? So you could just say, okay, I can't avoid it, I'm not taking it in, I'm not reacting to it. And then once the music is gone, the effect of it is gone. But if you have this subconscious self, that mental emotional construct, where you're reacting this, you're making it bad, I shouldn't have been exposed to this, this is so bad, then that reaction you carry with you when the music stops, right? So this is what you have to be careful about. And again, the way I look at it is, we live on Earth, there are certain things we can't avoid. Now obviously if you're sensitive to electromagnetic fields, you don't want to buy a house next to a cell tower. And you want to avoid it as much as you can. But I'm just saying again, as long as we're living on Earth, there are certain things we have to accept and make the best of it. Most people are sensitive to weather. Certain types of air pressure makes you feel depressed. Gray day, rainy day, foggy day, you don't feel as good as when it's bright and sunny. And so, but we can't do anything about the weather, right? So we just have to find a way to live with it where we say, okay, I understand this affects me. I seek to avoid the physical exposure to it when I can, but when I can't, I have to, in a sense, you have to become transparent to it, so that it just goes in one ear, out the other. It just passes through you. And so you could say, and the person is saying, I meet a lot of spiritual people who state that if my vibration is high enough and I am enlightened enough, my sensitivity would be gone. No, I don't agree with that. But you wouldn't have any reaction to it. You would just say, okay, that's how it is, let it pass through me. You can become transparent to it because there's nothing in there that it activates, nothing in your subconscious mind that it activates. But you'll still be sensitive, because if you're sensitive, you're sensitive. And then the person says, I know that there were some awakened people who can even drink poisons without it affecting them. Yeah. First of all, I don't recommend trying in order to demonstrate how awakened you are. But I'm not saying these things can't happen in specific cases. But here, this is actually a really interesting topic. Let me just talk a little bit about this. Okay, Jesus said 2,000 years ago, he that believeth on me, the works that I do shall ye do also, and even greater works shall ye do, because I go unto the Father. So Jesus was basically saying, if you are attaining the same level of awareness that I had, you can perform the miracles I performed. But is that necessarily the case? Because Jesus also said, I can of my own self do nothing. It's the Father within me. So, if you take what the person is referring to, that many spiritual people are saying, if I'm enlightened enough, I shouldn't be sensitive, you could say, people who are enlightened enough should be able to do the miracles Jesus did. So we should see a lot of Indian gurus walking on water. But you see, times were different back then. The consciousness, the collective consciousness was so much lower, and in order to even get people's attention, you had to do something special. And that's why the Spirit working through Jesus performed certain miracles, but it doesn't mean that the Spirit working through us today would perform the same miracles, because times have changed. Right? Another thing is, of course, that if you had a video of somebody walking on water, they'd say, oh, it's fake, it's Photoshop. It's just AI created. Nobody would believe it anyway. So all I'm saying is, I don't agree with the view that all enlightened people should be able to perform miracles. It may happen in certain special cases, but it's not something you can plan on, it's not something you can control, it's not something you can do. You can't do it to show off or to prove that the spiritual path is valid. I met so many people, and myself included when I was younger, we dreamt that one day there would be some physical, undeniable proof of the spiritual side of life, or the existence of ascended masters, or higher states of consciousness, or this or that. In TM, that I was in for several years there, I started having these siddhi techniques based on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And the dream was, and one of them was levitating. You could, the flying siddhi, as it was called. And there was dreams that one day there would be a public demonstration where people would hover in the air and therefore prove how valid transcendental meditation was. But that was back in the 1970s. I was a member of TM. And as far as I am recollecting, there hasn't been any public demonstration where people are hovering in the air. There's somebody can jump around a little bit, but not really hover in the air, right? So what I'm saying is that there's a balance to be found there. And that's why I'm saying I don't agree that if your vibration is high enough and you are enlightened enough, your sensitivity would be gone. You would still be sensitive. Why wouldn't you? But the question is whether it would bother you. And I think as you raise your consciousness, as you overcome subconscious selves, it'll bother you less and less. So again, if you look at yourself and say, okay, I can see that I have a reaction, I have one of these subconscious selves that reacts to my sensitivity and therefore makes it worse for me. And if you dissolve that self, or maybe a few selves, but if you dissolve that, your sensitivity will still be there, but it won't affect you as it's affecting you now. I've seen so many spiritual people over the years who have done this. You find a spiritual teaching and you become aware. See, what is it that happens when you find the spiritual path? All of a sudden you become aware of a lot of things that you weren't brought up to be aware of. So one of the things you become aware of is that all these things can affect you energetically. There are all these things that affect your energy field, and all of a sudden, and in a sense, what happens to a lot of people is that you go from feeling relatively secure in this material world to feeling very insecure, because now all of a sudden the threats you grew up knowing about, you could sort of deal with them psychologically, but all of a sudden now there's a whole new world of threats that opens up, of how many bad things can happen to you. And all of a sudden people get paranoid. They literally can get paranoid. I'm not saying that applies to the person asking the question. I'm just elaborating on the question here, because I've seen so many people go into this. You become focused on something. Chemtrails, for example. UFOs. Whatever it may be. And all of a sudden you build this subconscious resistance to it. And the resistance is what affects you, and it has a negative effect on you. And so I have seen people dig themselves into a hole where they built more and more resistance to all of these outer things, to the point where they were almost paralyzed. I mean, they really couldn't function, because whatever you do, there are all these negative effects. Or they build into this situation where, in order to counteract all these effects, they have to do all of these things. For example, with decrees, you can give you can give several hours of decrees a day to protect yourself against any eventuality. Or you can crystals or incense or this or that. I mean, all kinds of things that people do to protect themselves. But, and I'm not saying that there aren't people that are sensitive, but I am just saying you can get to a point where you are actually trying to protect yourself from your own reaction. And that is what keeps you trapped. So the way I would look at it basically is that if you have this, like the person says, I suppose that there is truth in saying that when I have overcome all my separate selves and are in a state of enlightenment, no lower vibrations can affect me. No, I don't think there's a truth to that. I'm not saying that lower vibrations can't affect you physically, affect your physical body. It's the same as if you drink poison, it's going to affect your physical body. But what I'm saying is that you can get to a point, I don't think you need to be enlightened to do it, but you can overcome these separate selves so that they don't affect you psychologically. And I think you can come to a point where, if a person says, for example, EMFs can cause synthetic ethereal grid that is not healthy and makes it harder to tune in, and it makes it easier for negative forces to affect them. That is there at the lower levels of consciousness, and I do think you can overcome that, where an electromagnetic field, for example, it isn't going to open you up to lower forces, especially not if you're exposed to it on a temporary basis. So what I'm saying is you can get to a point where it is not affecting your emotional, mental, and identity body. It may still affect your physical body because you are sensitive to it. So I think definitely it's valuable to look at, do I have any separate selves that's created, perhaps in past lifetimes, regarding to my sensitivity? Or do I have some that are just created because I have read this spiritual teaching that made me fear this condition, and now I'm reacting to it, and it's actually the reaction that's affecting me negatively rather than the outer condition? I think it's valid to ask those questions and then see where that gets you, because I think you can certainly make a lot of progress by doing that. In terms of whether the IH negative blood makes you more sensitive, I really have no knowledge of that. So I can't say yes or no. Basically, you know, you could say, and a question like this, you really, once in a while, you can ask yourself the question, did me finding the spiritual path help me lead a more constructive and peaceful life? Or did it make me more anxious and paranoid and focused on a lot of outer things? I'm not saying ignorance is bliss, it isn't, but what I'm saying is that I've seen so many people that they find a spiritual path, they become aware of all these things, now they are so concerned about it, so focused about it. And then what usually happens is after a while people start to relax a little bit. Some break under the strain and can't do it anymore, but some people just start being more relaxed and realize, maybe it isn't as bad as I thought it was when I was younger. I'm not saying that applies to the person here who's obviously been on the spiritual path for a long time, but I'm just saying it's good to keep that in mind, I think.